Hello, this is Jeff Morgan. You are listening to an authorized audio version of The Age of Post-Scarcity, Volume 1. If this material is interesting to you and you'd like to continue, you're welcome to like the video and subscribe to the channel. You can also find my other books on Amazon Kindle, where I publish both fiction and nonfiction exploring similar themes. Thank you for listening.
Chapter 4, Anti-Gravity Propulsion, Rewriting the Rules of Motion. To master gravity is to master the map of possibility. Introduction. From the earliest moments of conscious movement, gravity has defined the limits of human ambition. It has shaped not only the structure of our bodies and the function of our technologies, but the imagination of our civilizations. Every act of building, transportation, and exploration has been constrained by the invisible pull that binds all matter to the Earth. As Buckminster Fuller observed in Critical Path, gravity is the foundational condition that forces all terrestrial design into compromise, resisting the freedom of fluid movement and necessitating material overcompensation in every structure. To imagine overcoming gravity is to imagine redesigning the terms of existence itself. The history of transportation has been a chronicle of our struggle with this force. Muscle, wheel, sail, and steam each sought to defy the limitations imposed by weight and drag. The combustion engine offered temporary triumph, allowing us to race across land and take to the skies, but always through force, not freedom. As Eric Davis explains in the Anti-Gravity Handbook, nearly all movement technologies before the advent of anti-gravity have relied on expending tremendous energy to counteract gravitational pull. Even rocketry, the pinnacle of current propulsion, is an exercise in brute escape, with fuel-intensive launches and finite trajectories. Miguel Alcubierre, in his analysis of theoretical warp propulsion, describes this method as energetically unsustainable for long-term cosmic expansion. Yet gravity is not merely physical. It is metaphysical. It is a condition that organizes the layout of cities, the metaphors of language, and the frames of culture. Groundedness is not just architectural. It is emotional, cognitive, and spiritual. To dream of levitation is to dream of transcendence. Mythologies of flight from Icarus to the flying chariots of the gods capture a longing not only to rise, but to rise free from constraint. Harold Puthoff has argued that anti-gravity propulsion would initiate not just a technological leap, but a paradigmatic shift in human consciousness, offering a way to reconceptualize physical interaction as something participatory rather than oppositional. At the core of this revolution lies a change in understanding. Einstein's general theory of relativity replaced Newton's image of gravity as a force with the concept of space-time curvature, suggesting that gravity is not something to fight, but something to reshape. When mass distorts the geometry of space-time, it creates the conditions we perceive as gravity. If this geometry can be influenced, as recent theoretical and experimental models suggest, then the very nature of motion can be rewritten. As David Deutsch notes in The Beginning of Infinity, mastery over such fields would imply that movement itself can be reframed as an interaction with the structure of reality, not a mechanical traversal through it. This chapter explores the implications of that mastery. It begins with gravity as the oldest limit, tracking its imprint on the evolution of society and motion. It then traces the theoretical foundations that make anti-gravity conceivable, including Einsteinian physics, gravitomagnetism, quantum field manipulation, and the roles of superconductors and metamaterials. Evidence drawn from military observations, reverse engineering claims, and reported craft performance points to the growing plausibility of functional anti-gravity systems. From there, the chapter examines the terrestrial transformations that would follow, including floating cities, frictionless transport, and airborne industry before expanding outward to consider space exploration, orbital infrastructure, and potential interstellar travel. Alongside these possibilities, the chapter addresses the risks of weaponization, surveillance, inequality, and psychological dislocation. Finally, it imagines the lived experience of a world unbound from gravitational limits, how culture, identity, and perception might evolve when the ground is no longer the primary axis of reality. As Wendell Wallach and Colin Allen argue in Moral Machines, technologies capable of reshaping human behavior on this scale must be developed with ethical foresight and global dialogue, or else their benefits may be eclipsed by their consequences. To master gravity is not merely to escape Earth's pull. It is to rewrite the map of what is possible, to transform the conditions under which motion, interaction, and imagination unfold. This is not the next step in engineering. It is the next chapter in evolution. Gravity, the oldest limit. Gravity has shaped the human experience long before it was ever understood scientifically. It is the invisible architect of terrestrial life, the constraint that humans have struggled against since their earliest attempts at motion. From the first steps of bipedal locomotion to the launch of spacefaring vehicles, gravity has been the universal constant, a force not merely of physics, but of cultural and civilizational framing. Humanity's earliest transportation systems, including walking, animal harnessing, and the wheel, were all designed to move across land under the influence of gravity. Even as technological development advanced to sailing ships, steam locomotives, and combustion engines, every innovation had to contend with the pull of Earth. The invention of flight, though revolutionary, was still a fight against gravity rather than a mastery of it. As described by Eric Davis, all methods of movement before anti-gravity required immense energy to overcome Earth's gravitational pull, indicating that gravity has been less a passive background force than an active limiter of innovation and freedom. Yet gravity's influence extends far beyond mechanics. It has defined the shape and material logic of cities, buildings, vehicles, and even the human body. Architects and engineers design within its bounds. Transportation infrastructure, such as roads, bridges, and tunnels, is built with gravity as its foundational challenge. Gravity even influences time through Einstein's theory of general relativity, which shows that gravitational fields bend not just space, but also temporal flow. Thus, to understand gravity is to understand why civilizations have taken the shape they have. The limitations imposed by gravity become especially clear when compared to the aspirations of space exploration. Rocketry emerged as the brute force solution to gravity's dominance, hurling objects skyward with tremendous energy cost. Traditional launch systems, such as those employed by NASA or SpaceX, burn through vast quantities of fuel just to escape the gravitational well of Earth. As Miguel Alcubierre explains, the energy required to break free from gravity is not only technically immense, but economically unsustainable, making space exploration an elite and infrequent endeavor. Gravity, however, is not merely a physical force. It is a psychological and cultural one. It roots us in place, shapes our metaphors for constraint and effort, and informs our spatial understanding of up and down, high and low, freedom and limitation. The dream of flying, of levitating, of floating has haunted the human imagination in myth, religion, and literature. From Icarus to Da Vinci, the longing to transcend gravity has been interpreted as a desire for transcendence itself. As Harold Puthoff notes, anti-gravity propulsion would not only change how we move, but would transform our very way of interacting with the physical world. The next phase of human mobility hinges on reinterpreting gravity itself, not just resisting it, but neutralizing or even reversing it. Anti-gravity is not simply levitation or mechanical lift. It refers to technologies that interact with gravity at the field level, potentially creating counterforces or reducing effective mass altogether. Unlike magnetic levitation or aerodynamic thrust, which still require contact with matter or air, anti-gravity implies the manipulation of space-time itself. As Davis remarks, mass reduction does not just change how things move. It redefines what is possible. This redefinition introduces a new era of mobility. Every structure, system, and philosophy built in reaction to gravity must be reconsidered. Transportation no longer needs to be tethered to terrain. Architecture can move, float, or exist in vertical space without support. The physical exhaustion long required to overcome inertia could disappear. Gravity's reign as the oldest limit may soon end, not through brute resistance, but through intellectual and technological transcendence. To master gravity, then, is not simply to move more easily. It is to redesign the map of what is possible. Every human advancement has emerged from redefining limits, tools to extend the hand, fire to extend warmth, language to extend thought. Anti-gravity, as the extension of motion itself, may become the most transformative limit we ever surpass. The sky, long viewed as the highest barrier, may become only the beginning. Theoretical foundations of anti-gravity. The scientific foundation of anti-gravity propulsion is rooted in modern understandings of gravity, quantum field theory, and material science. At the heart of this emerging discipline is a shift away from Newtonian interpretations of gravity as a simple force and toward Einstein's revolutionary concept of gravity as a curvature of spacetime. In his general theory of relativity, Einstein described gravity not as an invisible tether, but as the warping of spacetime caused by mass and energy. This insight opened the door to the idea that if one could manipulate spacetime itself, one could also manipulate gravity. As Miguel Alcubierre proposed in his model of a theoretical warp drive, distorting spacetime may allow for propulsion mechanisms that do not rely on conventional thrust at all. Among the most promising phenomena in this field is gravitomagnetism, an effect predicted by Einstein's equations and observed in the Lenz-Thirring effect. This effect describes how massive rotating bodies can drag space-time around with them, a subtle influence that has been experimentally confirmed through satellite measurements. The implication is profound. Under the right conditions, space-time itself can be influenced, and if this rotation-induced distortion can be harnessed, it might allow the creation of localized gravitational fields that oppose Earth's pull. This manipulation of spacetime becomes even more intriguing with the theoretical inclusion of negative energy densities. Negative energy is not merely a speculative concept. It emerges naturally from quantum field theory, particularly in phenomena like the Casimir effect. When two uncharged metal plates are placed close together in a vacuum, they experience an attractive force due to quantum fluctuations, effectively proving the presence of vacuum energy. These fluctuations can be seen as negative energy fields, and their manipulation could offer the repulsive force needed to counteract gravity. In practical terms, the search for anti-gravity has moved beyond abstract theory into material science. Superconductors and metamaterials are now considered critical components in developing anti-gravity systems. Superconductors exhibit zero electrical resistance and generate intense magnetic fields when cooled to extremely low temperatures. These fields have already enabled magnetic levitation in train systems, but their potential in anti-gravity research lies in their ability to generate stable electromagnetic environments that may interact with gravitational fields. Metamaterials, on the other hand, are engineered structures designed to control wave propagation. These materials can be structured at the quantum level to produce unusual interactions with light, sound, and potentially gravitational waves. David Deutsch suggests that metamaterials could be designed to manipulate space-time curvature directly, allowing artificial gravitational fields to be created or suppressed. Quantum mechanics also plays a central role. In particular, The intersection of zero-point energy and mass relativity introduces a potential framework for anti-gravity. The idea is that if the zero-point fluctuations of the quantum vacuum can be harnessed, they might be used to influence how mass responds to force, thereby reducing inertia or inducing lift. Researchers like Harold Puthoff propose that vacuum engineering could create conditions where gravitational influence is either negated or reversed. NASA's EagleWorks Laboratories has explored these principles in its investigation of advanced propulsion systems. Their research into the M-drive and warp field mechanics provides one of the few examples of institutional experimentation with non-Newtonian propulsion. While controversial and still lacking broad empirical confirmation, these experiments reflect a growing willingness within the scientific community to pursue unconventional models of motion and mass interaction. Altogether, the theoretical basis for anti-gravity propulsion is no longer confined to the realm of science fiction. With a synthesis of general relativity, quantum field theory, and advanced materials science, the concept of neutralizing gravity at the field level is gaining traction. While many hurdles remain, including the stabilization of gravitational fields and the massive energy requirements involved, the foundation is scientifically credible and continually expanding. As Eric Davis notes, mastering gravity will open up possibilities for transportation that we have only dreamed about: cities floating in the sky, frictionless vehicles, and spacecraft that move faster than anything we have ever known. Evidence of functional anti-gravity technology. The concept of anti-gravity propulsion may once have belonged to the realm of science fiction, but today it resides at the frontier of emerging science, covert research, and unexplained aerospace phenomena. A growing body of evidence, spanning military encounters, declassified reports, and reverse engineering claims, suggests the presence of craft that defy the known limits of inertia and propulsion. These accounts converge on recurring patterns of movement, lift, and control that implies some form of field-based or gravitational manipulation rather than thrust-dependent mechanics. One of the most compelling sources of evidence comes from military and defense agencies. In recent years, the U.S. Navy released multiple infrared videos depicting unidentified aerial phenomena performing maneuvers that defy conventional physics. These craft were observed executing right-angle turns at hypersonic speeds without sonic booms or heat signatures. As described in the Pentagon's preliminary assessment on unidentified aerial phenomena, these objects appear to operate without visible propulsion, suggesting that they do not rely on conventional aerodynamics or combustion engines. Former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Christopher Mellon, has pointed out that these craft exhibit flight characteristics that go beyond the limits of human technology, including the ability to hover silently, accelerate instantaneously, and remain unaffected by gravity or drag forces. These unusual flight profiles are echoed in reverse engineering claims by insiders associated with classified defense programs. Bob Lazar, who first came to public attention in the late 1980s, claimed to have worked at a facility known as S4 near Area 51, where he was allegedly tasked with back-engineering propulsion systems from recovered alien craft. According to Lazar, the vehicles operated by creating their own gravitational fields using a reactor fueled by element 115, a super-heavy element that could enable gravitational manipulation. While his claims remain controversial and unverified, some aspects, such as the later synthesis of moscovium element 115 in laboratories, have lent circumstantial support to his assertions. Lazar described the core function of these vehicles as amplifying gravity waves to warp space-time, thus achieving lift and motion without combustion or inertia. Additional support for anti-gravity theories comes from descriptions of recovered or observed craft that reportedly exhibit gravitic shielding or mass reduction capabilities. These technologies would allow a craft to essentially decouple from the gravitational pull of a planet, floating or accelerating without inertial resistance. As noted by physicist Eric Davis, Massless or mass-reduced systems would not be bound by conventional propulsion limits and would explain the silent, reactionless movements of many unidentified craft. These observations align with emerging research on the manipulation of the Higgs field, the quantum field believed to endow particles with mass. Miguel Alcubierre has speculated that if a localized disruption of the Higgs field were achieved, it might create objects that behave as if they were massless. Common behavioral signatures of these craft include seamless liftoff, silent hovering, and rapid directional changes that suggest field-based control. Unlike drones or jets, these objects appear to fall into motion, implying a form of propulsion that leverages gravitational fields rather than resisting them. Jacques Vallée, in his investigative work on aerial phenomena, has documented cases in which the movement of craft corresponds more closely to controlled descent into gravitational wells than thrust-based ascension. He describes these patterns as gravity surfing, wherein objects appear to glide along invisible contours of space-time, possibly enabled by gravitic tunneling or manipulation of inertial mass. One particularly intriguing hypothesis involves gravitic tunneling, a process by which fields are engineered to create corridors through space-time that reduce or eliminate gravitational resistance. This model bears similarities to Alcubierre's warp bubble theory, in which a vessel rides a wave of space-time contraction and expansion rather than pushing through it. According to Hal Puthoff, such field manipulations could result in effects that are indistinguishable from anti-gravity. He writes, a properly engineered interaction with the vacuum energy field may allow for the neutralization of inertial mass, effectively enabling motion without force. If these observations are correct, they imply the existence of a technology far beyond current human capability. Such craft are often described as silent, seamless, and maneuverable in ways that contradict aerodynamic expectations. These signatures are not consistent with any known propulsion system, but are precisely what we would expect from a field-based vehicle operating with reduced or nullified mass. Moreover, the lack of sonic booms, heat trails, or fuel exhaust strongly indicates a form of propulsion that bypasses Newtonian mechanics entirely. While definitive proof remains elusive, the convergence of military reports, theoretical models, and alleged insider testimony presents a compelling case for further investigation. Whether these craft originate from advanced human research or represent non-human intelligence, they provide empirical phenomena that demand scientific scrutiny. The patterns they exhibit, sudden acceleration, silent operation, and gravity-defying movement, are not easily explained by atmospheric illusions or sensor errors. They are evidence, albeit enigmatic, of a propulsion paradigm rooted not in combustion or force, but in field interaction and space-time engineering. As research continues and more data is declassified, the credibility of anti-gravity technology will depend not only on eyewitness reports or radar tracks, but on whether theoretical physics and experimental engineering can converge to replicate these behaviors in controlled conditions. Until then, these phenomena represent both a mystery and a promise, a glimpse of what may lie ahead when gravity ceases to be a limit and becomes instead a design variable. Terrestrial applications of anti-gravity propulsion. The emergence of anti-gravity propulsion stands to radically redefine human interaction with the built environment, transforming not only how we move, but how we design, inhabit, and sustain terrestrial life. Central to this shift is the capacity to levitate and propel matter without combustion or friction, decoupling movement from terrain and climate. This technological revolution promises to displace fossil fuel-based infrastructure and replace it with floating, frictionless systems that harmonize mobility, architecture, and sustainability. Perhaps the most immediate transformation would occur in transportation. Anti-gravity propulsion allows vehicles to hover and glide, rendering roads, rails, and even runways obsolete. Eric Davis explains that this would enable instant, silent movement with minimal environmental impact, allowing personal vehicles, delivery systems, and public transit to operate in three dimensions without relying on mechanical friction or fuel-based propulsion. This frictionless movement would reduce energy consumption and eliminate emissions, turning transportation into a clean and fluid process. Cities plagued by traffic congestion could instead see multi-level corridors of aerial movement, with personalized transport pods and cargo carriers navigating above the urban landscape. Beyond individual vehicles, anti-gravity technology introduces the possibility of floating buildings and mobile infrastructure. Davis proposes a future in which structures that were once impossible, such as cities that float above the ground or buildings that can be moved, become feasible through anti-gravity engineering. These floating structures could be dynamically reconfigured in response to environmental conditions, population needs, or natural disasters. They might hover over oceans, deserts, or forest canopies, creating adaptable habitats that leave no physical footprint on the land. These innovations mirror the vision articulated by Miguel Alcubierre, who suggests that such manipulation of gravity would remove constraints of conventional foundations, enabling structures to transcend topographical and geotechnical limitations. In rural and remote regions, anti-gravity could revolutionize access and logistics. Infrastructure projects that once required invasive land development, such as highways, pipelines, and tunnels, will be replaced by airborne transit and energy delivery systems. According to Hal Puthoff, this shift would eliminate many of the environmental harms associated with current transportation systems, including habitat destruction, pollution, and fragmentation of ecosystems. Goods could be transported via floating cargo vessels that travel silently and cleanly across vast distances, bypassing the constraints of ports and road networks. In construction and industry, anti-gravity would transform the handling of massive objects. Cranes and bulldozers would be replaced by levitation technologies capable of lifting entire structures without mechanical strain. This would enable new modes of fabrication, including the assembly of modular components in midair. Manufacturing could occur in zero-gravity fields where weight no longer impedes precision, and delicate materials could be suspended rather than braced, eliminating the risk of collapse or deformation. Davis envisions this as a paradigm where gravity becomes an optional parameter rather than an unyielding constraint. Urban design would also undergo profound changes. Anti-gravity systems allow for vertical zoning that transcends the horizontal sprawl of conventional cities. Plazas, homes, schools, and farms could be stacked in layered ecosystems above forests, lakes, or deserts, with each stratum optimized for climate, light, and activity. These aerial cities, liberated from the tyranny of land scarcity, would allow populations to expand without consuming natural habitats. As Buckminster Fuller once imagined, the sky itself would become an inhabitable domain, a civic terrain woven with gardens, skywalks, and modular districts. Anti-gravity propulsion also opens new frontiers for rural and underdeveloped areas. Mobile health clinics, educational centers, and disaster relief platforms could hover directly above regions that lack roads or safe passage. Instead of waiting for resources to arrive via slow and costly ground transport, services could float into position and remain until no longer needed. Alcubierre emphasizes that such applications would allow humanity to respond swiftly to emergencies and shifting geographies without disruption. In essence, anti-gravity technology invites a complete rethinking of terrestrial life, not simply as a mechanical improvement over old systems, but as a chance to harmonize design with freedom and sustainability. It offers not just faster movement, but gentler presence, not just industrial capability, but ecological grace. With it, cities become clouds of intelligent design, mobility becomes a choreography of effortless motion, and the earth is no longer something to be conquered, but to be danced with lightly and with care. Anti-gravity in space exploration and galactic mobility. The application of anti-gravity propulsion to space exploration represents a decisive shift in humanity's ability to navigate the cosmos. Traditional rocketry, bound by Newtonian physics and the limitations of chemical fuel, demands tremendous energy to overcome Earth's gravity. Launches are noisy, dangerous, and expensive, often requiring entire support infrastructures just to escape the atmosphere. Anti-gravity propulsion reimagines this paradigm from the ground up. It replaces thrust with field manipulation, replacing combustion with coherence. As Miguel Alcubierre writes, gravity is not just a force to resist. It is a field to be shaped. When shaped correctly, it becomes the engine of motion rather than the obstacle to it. The most immediate benefit of anti-gravity propulsion is the elimination of conventional launch mechanisms. With gravity-neutral platforms, spacecraft could lift from planetary surfaces without the use of massive boosters or explosive fuel stages. Instead of vertical towers reaching skyward in fiery ascent, orbital ascent becomes an act of controlled levitation. Platforms stabilized by anti-gravity fields could serve as vertical elevators or tethered ascension structures that move passengers and cargo smoothly into space. Such systems would make regular, safe, and low-impact launches feasible for both human travelers and freight, completely altering the economics and safety profile of spaceflight. Beyond planetary escape, anti-gravity propulsion opens new pathways for interplanetary travel. With field-based motion unburdened by fuel limitations, spacecraft could navigate gravitational wells and planetary orbits using gravitational contours like ocean currents. This gravitational surfing would allow for efficient, elegant travel across the solar system. Paired with technologies like mass reduction and zero-point energy coupling, these vehicles could accelerate without resistance and coast indefinitely without propulsion decay. As Harold Puthoff explains, anti-gravity systems represent a transition from reaction-based to field-responsive motion, allowing continuous, clean propulsion through gravitational tailoring. Such technology also transforms the logic of deep space missions. Traditional space missions must carry all fuel and supplies at launch, limiting both range and duration. With anti-gravity propulsion, spacecraft become self-contained systems that no longer depend on fuel stores. They could decelerate and accelerate repeatedly, take adaptive routes, and remain in motion for years or decades without degradation. According to Alcubierre, by reducing the need for high-speed chemical propulsion, anti-gravity could open up new pathways for space exploration, allowing humanity to venture deeper into space. This same principle enables the construction of long-duration orbital habitats and space stations. Anti-gravity stabilization would allow these structures to remain fixed in orbit without constant fuel-based adjustment. Their positions could be altered effortlessly to optimize solar exposure, avoid debris, or align with planetary surfaces. Floating colonies could drift through Lagrange points or orbit moons with precision, offering platforms for exploration, scientific research, or even cultural development. Davis describes this possibility as floating space platforms becoming not outposts but homes, autonomous, adaptable, and unbound by any single planetary body. Perhaps most provocative is the potential for anti-gravity to assist in stabilizing wormhole networks. Though still theoretical, the idea that wormholes could serve as portals across vast distances of space-time has captured scientific and cultural imagination. One challenge in wormhole physics is maintaining spatial alignment between entrance and exit points. Anti-gravity field could provide localized gravitational stability, creating static, non-rotating entry points that remain fixed in relation to planetary orbits. These stabilized nodes would allow safe and repeatable passage through wormholes, transforming them from speculative anomalies into engineered infrastructure. The gravity control technologies necessary for propulsion would double as the regulators of spatial topology, enabling a truly galactic transport system. Thus, anti-gravity propulsion represents more than just a new method of space travel. It is a redefinition of the boundary between planet and cosmos. It collapses the conceptual and physical gap between Earth and the stars, between gravity wells and vacuum. It dissolves the hard divide between the human world and the interstellar realm. With this technology, space is no longer distant. It is immediate, navigable, and integrated into human life. And as Alcubierre concludes, the Great Barrier has never been distance. It has always been gravity. And now, that barrier falls. Societal, economic, and environmental impacts. The widespread integration of anti-gravity propulsion would produce seismic shifts across society, economics, and the environment. Its implications stretch far beyond transportation, touching every aspect of how humanity organizes its systems, inhabits the planet, and imagines possibility. As gravity becomes a variable rather than a constant, the structures that have shaped civilization, literally and figuratively, stand to be transformed. One of the most immediate changes would manifest in urban and industrial design. Floating cities are no longer the domain of speculative fiction. Anti-gravity technologies enable the detachment of architecture from geography. Buildings can be designed to hover above flood zones, earthquake-prone regions, or rising coastlines, dynamically repositioning in response to climate, economic opportunity, or social need. As Eric Davis notes, with anti-gravity propulsion, the concept of permanent, fixed cities could give way to dynamic, floating communities that can move freely across the globe. This architectural liberation could ease population density in megacities and support the development of new, sustainable living environments above oceans, deserts, and remote frontiers. Economically, anti-gravity propulsion would dismantle entire sectors while birthing new ones. The fossil fuel transportation industry, ranging from airlines to shipping to ground logistics, would be rendered obsolete. Vehicles and cargo systems would operate without combustion engines or rail networks, reducing infrastructure maintenance costs and eliminating dependence on oil. Jeremy Rifkin describes this as a shift toward a distributed mobility system, where vehicles and platforms no longer need fixed tracks or highways, but navigate open airspace autonomously. Logistics chains would shorten and decentralize as goods float directly from factories to consumers with minimal energy input. This redefinition of movement would lower barriers to market entry and allow regions previously considered isolated to participate in global commerce. Environmentally, the potential benefits are revolutionary. Transportation currently accounts for approximately 1/4 of global carbon emissions. Anti-gravity vehicles, which do not rely on combustion or friction, would produce negligible emissions. As Harold Puthoff explains, the use of anti-gravity propulsion for transport would enable sustainable global mobility, eliminating many of the environmental harms associated with current transportation systems. The absence of roads, runways, and ports would return massive land areas to natural ecosystems. Wildlife corridors long fragmented by human transit infrastructure could be reconnected, supporting biodiversity regeneration. In rural and undeveloped regions, anti-gravity systems offer not only ecological repair, but inclusive development. Remote villages could be supplied without roads, enabling education, medicine, and commerce to reach previously inaccessible populations. As Miguel Alcubierre points out, the transportation of goods could become far more efficient, utilizing anti-gravity to streamline global supply chains and reduce the need for energy-intensive transportation infrastructure. This efficiency would also reduce the carbon and economic costs of international aid and emergency response, offering faster mobilization during disasters or humanitarian crises. Culturally, The decoupling from gravity could rewire how humans understand geography and proximity. Social relationships, professional collaboration, and artistic exchange would no longer be limited by physical distance or the availability of infrastructure. Three-dimensional movement would reconfigure cities into vertical layers rather than horizontal sprawl. Groundedness might shift from a literal condition to a metaphorical ideal, prompting new rituals and spatial practices that reflect aerial life. Artists could choreograph zero-gravity performances, educators could hold floating classrooms, and communities might gather in elevated plazas drifting above forest canopies or open sea. The societal transition, however, will require new frameworks of governance and equity. Access to anti-gravity systems must be democratized to prevent new forms of economic stratification. As Davis cautions, although the potential of anti-gravity is vast, the technology remains experimental and unstable, with much still to be understood before it can be implemented on a large scale. This instability, both technical and political, demands careful planning. Infrastructure that floats must be anchored in shared ethics. The revolution in movement promised by anti-gravity propulsion is not merely mechanical. It is civilizational. It alters how space is used, how economies grow, how nature heals, and how cultures evolve. It opens a world in which the pull of gravity no longer defines the boundaries of progress. Risks and ethical considerations. While anti-gravity propulsion holds transformative promise, it also presents profound ethical challenges and existential risks. As with every paradigm-shifting technology, its power must be tempered by foresight and guided by shared values. The ability to manipulate gravitational fields does not simply allow for greater mobility. It grants control over one of the most fundamental forces in nature. That control, if misused, could destabilize ecological, political, and psychological systems at every level of civilization. The first and most immediate concern is weaponization. Technologies capable of silently lifting heavy payloads, hovering in place, and maneuvering without inertia could be exploited for stealth warfare. As Michael Sallin notes in Exopolitics, anti-gravity craft operating without heat signatures or sonic booms pose unique challenges to existing defense systems, making detection and deterrence nearly impossible. The deployment of such systems in military contexts could escalate geopolitical tensions and provoke a new arms race, one not bound by terrestrial limitations. The potential for orbital weapons platforms and floating surveillance systems, as Richard Dolan outlines in UFOs and the National Security State, introduces a surveillance threat far greater than anything posed by ground-based technologies. Control of the air, once the domain of sovereign airspace, becomes contested territory. If individuals or private corporations develop proprietary anti-gravity vehicles, the issue of aerial rights emerges with urgent complexity. Who owns the sky? Who regulates vertical transit? What protocols govern traffic above public and private land? These are not hypothetical concerns. As noted by Daniel Suarez in Kill Decision, autonomous flying systems with advanced navigation could easily bypass national and international law, leading to a privatization of aerial movement that leaves little room for democratic oversight. In addition to surveillance and control, there is a risk of cultural and psychological dislocation. As physical proximity becomes irrelevant to interaction, traditional notions of community, locality, and groundedness may erode. Sherry Tuckle explores this phenomenon in Alone Together, noting that even digital networks have already begun to displace face-to-face connection and reduce the depth of interpersonal experience. Anti-gravity systems could accelerate this trend, enabling a population that is physically mobile yet emotionally fragmented. As cities dissolve into floating pods and airborne enclaves, the danger of isolation, detachment, and a loss of shared civic life grows. Another ethical dimension lies in access. If anti-gravity propulsion remains a proprietary technology, controlled by a few corporations or elite governments, it could entrench new hierarchies. As Naomi Klein emphasizes in the shock doctrine, crisis-driven innovation often exacerbates inequality unless explicitly designed for equity. The potential of anti-gravity to decentralize infrastructure and reduce environmental damage will only be realized if it is distributed fairly. Otherwise, it becomes another tool of domination rather than liberation. There are also ecological risks that arise not from pollution, but from disconnection. The ease of bypassing terrain could lead to unchecked expansion into sensitive ecosystems, accelerating habitat disruption under the illusion of light environmental footprint. Floating homes, cities, and industries might seem benign, but without proper oversight, they could cast shadow zones on habitats below or alter atmospheric flow patterns. As Bill McKibben warns in The End of Nature, technologies that minimize visible harm can still disrupt underlying ecological balances if applied without humility and restraint. Finally, there are metaphysical and philosophical questions to consider. Gravity has not only shaped our bodies, but our consciousness. It defines up and down, rootedness, and aspiration. As Jean Gebser writes in The Ever-Present Origin, human perception is fundamentally structured by the dimensional constraints of embodied life. To lift those constraints is to enter a new mode of being. This transformation could open creative, spiritual, and social possibilities, but it also requires a new sense of discipline. What replaces groundedness when the ground is optional? What values stabilize a culture when it floats above consequence? Anti-gravity propulsion demands not only technical mastery, but ethical maturity. It must be developed in tandem with governance systems, ecological stewardship, and cultural practices that preserve human connection and planetary balance. The temptation to ascend must be matched by the wisdom to remain present. Otherwise, in lifting ourselves beyond gravity, we may lose the very things that once gave our lives weight. Living with anti-gravity, a future vignette. Imagine a civilization where anti-gravity is not a marvel of engineering, but a background condition of daily life. In this world, elevation is no longer a mechanical feat, but an act of design. Cities do not sprawl across landscapes, but rise in layers, floating above forests, oceans, and deserts without displacement. Public squares hover in the sky. Children play in drifting spheres suspended by field generators. The ground is no longer the limit of human imagination. Residential life is no longer bound to static coordinates. Homes float like living vessels, adjustable in altitude, rotation, and climate exposure. As envisioned in Buckminster Fuller's concept of tensegrity spheres, such structures are not anchored by concrete or steel, but by dynamic equilibrium with surrounding fields. A family could spend one season above the savanna and the next hovering just off the coast, shifting location without disturbing the ecosystems below. The terrain becomes a canvas, not a constraint. Transportation has also transformed. Individuals navigate personal aerial pods that use localized field modulation to levitate, accelerate, and hover. These pods are quiet, clean, and capable of adjusting altitude with the same ease a bicycle adjusts speed. As noted by Hal Puthoff in his work on vacuum engineering, small-scale gravitational manipulation could allow inertial-free motion across varied elevations with minimal energy input. These vehicles do not require roads, tracks, or refueling stations. They recharge from ambient energy fields and are guided by global coordination networks that prevent collisions through predictive modeling. Civic life unfolds in the sky. Walkways made from transparent, regenerative materials connect residential towers and communal spaces that float in soft lattices above rivers and mountains. As seen in speculative architectural work, such as Vincent Kalbot's Dragonfly project, skyborne urban planning is not only structurally feasible, but ecologically restorative, minimizing land use while maximizing solar access and airflow. Urban life is no longer defined by traffic and congestion, but by elevation and flow. Citizens travel vertically as easily as horizontally. The skyline becomes a circulatory system, not a boundary. Cultural practices adapt to this new medium. Children learn not just to walk and run, but to float, spiral, and drift. Education includes movement in 3 dimensions, with arts and athletics emphasizing grace and balance in airborne play. As Donna Haraway suggests in Staying with the Trouble, human identity is shaped not only by tools, but by kinship with the environment. In this world, gravitic interaction becomes a new language of embodiment. Dance is no longer choreographed solely for the stage. It is choreographed for sky plazas, elevated amphitheaters, and mobile platforms that respond to motion with synchronized elevation shifts. Art, ritual, and spiritual practice are equally transformed. Temples float in silence above sacred groves. Meditation takes place in low-orbit chambers that drift through dawn and dusk without horizon. Sky burials become literal, with memory vaults launched into orbit and family gatherings held at the edge of the atmosphere. As Thomas Berry writes in The Dream of the Earth, cosmology and culture must evolve together, honoring the new relationships that technology makes possible. Gravity, once a boundary, becomes a partner in expression. Environmental impact is radically minimized. Cities do not clear land, but hover over it. Roads are unnecessary, and their absence allows grasslands, forests, and waterways to regenerate. Wildlife corridors expand where highways once divided habitats. As Edward O. Wilson describes in Half-Earth, giving half the planet back to nature is only possible if human infrastructure becomes weightless and non-invasive. Anti-gravity makes such a vision not only possible, but elegant. In a world shaped by anti-gravity, daily life feels different. The sense of possibility is embodied in motion. To live here is to feel the body unburdened by mechanical resistance, to move in silent arcs through atmosphere, to gather in spheres where light, sound, and sensation are curated in all directions. People no longer define space by what they can reach, but by how they can rise. The vertical becomes civic. The sky becomes social. This is not a utopia. It is a transformation. It retains all the complexity of human life, emotion, conflict, desire, but reorganizes the physical and emotional map on which that life unfolds. The goal is not to escape the Earth, but to inhabit it differently, in relationship with gravity rather than opposition to it. In doing so, civilization gains not only a new form of movement, but a new kind of imagination. The sky becomes not a boundary, but a commons, a place to meet, a place to belong. Closing reflection. Gravity has shaped the architecture of every civilization, from how homes are built to how journeys are imagined. It has been the silent law beneath our feet, defining the physical and psychological boundaries of what is possible. As Victor A. Convertino notes in his exploration of biological adaptation, gravity has been the only constant environmental force during the entire evolutionary development of life on Earth, conditioning the structure of bodies and the behaviors of ecosystems. To live under gravity is to be immersed in a form of persistent resistance, an invisible weight that informs the way we grow, move, and dream. To overcome gravity, then, is not merely to invent a new form of transportation. It is to transcend the primary constraint that has defined terrestrial life. Such a shift is not only technological, it is conceptual. As Albert Einstein outlined in The Meaning of Relativity, gravity is not a force in the classical sense, but the result of space-time curvature, meaning that what binds us to the Earth is, in essence, a geometrical relationship that could, in theory, be manipulated. Anti-gravity propulsion redefines this relationship, offering not an escape from nature, but a reconfiguration of its terms. The implications extend far beyond engineering. A civilization that learns to move through gravity rather than against it will experience the world differently. Cities will float, roads will vanish, proximity will no longer be a function of surface distance. As Jim Pass explains in his founding essays on astrosociology, when space becomes socially navigable and not merely observable, the evolution of social structures and cultural identities accelerates in unpredictable ways. The very idea of borders, centers, and peripheries dissolves when the ground is no longer the reference point. But such a shift brings responsibility. Anti-gravity is not a neutral technology. It can uplift or oppress, depending on who wields it and to what end. Wendell Wallach and Colin Allen caution in Moral Machines that advanced systems capable of acting autonomously in high-stakes environments must be designed with ethical foresight, particularly when their power is transformative. The ability to float cities or hover warships will require new forms of planetary regulation, just as the invention of aviation once required airspace law and transnational cooperation. Gravity has been a metaphor for permanence, for inevitability, and for limitation. To rewrite the rules of motion is to rewrite the rules of civilization. The sky, once imagined as the final boundary, becomes instead the beginning of a new kind of human experience. If history has been a record of what gravity has shaped, the future may become a story of what it has released.
This is an authorized audio recording of The Age of Post-Scarcity, Volume 1. If you'd like to continue, the next chapter will be posted here on this channel. My other books are available on Amazon Kindle. You're also welcome to subscribe to receive notifications when new chapters are released.